The storm was merciless when Damien Hale, one of the world's wealthiest men, saw something that froze his blood. His Rolls-Royce Phantom purred along the winding driveway that led to the gates of his sprawling estate, the headlights slicing through sheets of rain. Damien cursed under his breath at the storm. He had a late-night conference call with partners in Singapore, and the downpour was delaying him. He had no patience for nature's tantrums. But then, through the blurred windshield, he saw her. At first, Damien thought it was a shadow, a trick of lightning flickering across the iron gates. But when his eyes adjusted, his breath caught in his throat. There, pressed against the wrought iron barrier like a fragile bird against a storm, stood a little black girl. She couldn't have been older than 9. Barefoot. Drenched. Her thin dress clung to her tiny frame, soaked through, offering no protection from the biting cold. Her hair was plastered against her face, raindrops streaming down like tears. But it wasn't just the child herself that made Damien's chest tighten. It was what she clutched. In her trembling arms, wrapped in threadbare cloth, lay a bundle, something she shielded as though the entire world wanted to steal it from her. The way her body curved protectively around it, the way she pressed her lips against the bundle as if whispering secrets of comfort, it wasn't hard to guess. She wasn't protecting an object. She was protecting life. Damien leaned forward, his knuckles white against the steering wheel. The girl staggered, nearly slipping on the slick gravel, but even as she fell to her knees, she did not let go of the bundle. Her thin arms curled tighter, her fragile body forming a human shield against the rain. The headlights illuminated her face for a moment. Eyes wide, not with fear, but with determination. Lips moving in a whisper drowned out by the storm. Damien turned off the wipers and lowered the window just slightly, letting the roar of rain fill the silence of the luxury car. "Shoo, it's okay," the girl murmured, rocking the bundle gently. "Don't cry, I've got you. I'll keep you safe." Her voice was hoarse, exhausted, but steady. She was speaking not for herself, but for whoever, or whatever, lay hidden inside those rags. Damien's stomach twisted. For years, he had grown used to ignoring the small figures that lingered near his gates. Street children. Orphans. Desperate souls who sought his mansion as a symbol of hope, though it never opened to them. Sometimes he tossed out coins, as though a sprinkle of his fortune would erase their hunger. Most nights, he drove past without a glance, secure in his insulated world of glass, steel, and wealth. But tonight was different. This was no ordinary beggar standing at his gate. This was a child fighting a war against the storm itself, refusing to abandon her secret cargo. A bolt of lightning cracked across the sky, and Damien saw her flinch, but instead of protecting herself, she bent further over the bundle, covering it with her tiny body. He swallowed hard. Something inside him, something long dormant, stirred. For a brief, irrational moment, he considered driving on, convincing himself it wasn't his problem. But he couldn't. His chest constricted as though invisible hands pressed against him. He gripped the wheel tighter, frozen between instinct and conscience. She was just a child. And yet, the way she clutched that bundle made him feel small, insignificant, ashamed. The rain hammered harder, bouncing off the hood of his car, blurring the girl's figure. Damien blinked, trying to focus. The gate lights flickered, illuminating her fragile form like a spotlight on a tragic stage. She swayed on her feet, barely able to stand, yet she never loosened her grip. His thoughts tumbled over each other. Why is she here, at my gate, in this storm? What's in that bundle? Why hasn't she run to a shelter, or is this her only chance at one? Another whisper carried through the storm. You're safe with me. I won't let them hurt you. Damien's pulse quickened. Them. He stared harder, his heart thudding. The girl's lips moved again, but this time he caught the words. Daddy will find a way. Daddy will keep you alive. The word slammed into him like a blow. Daddy. A child, barely old enough to be cared for herself, was calling herself a parent. In the heart of a storm, in front of gates taller than her hopes, she declared herself protector to whatever tiny life hid in her arms. Damien's hands trembled on the wheel. For 50 years, he had considered himself powerful, untouchable, a master of empires. And yet here was a barefoot girl, nameless, penniless, embodying more courage and sacrifice in a single night than he had in a lifetime. Shame burned through him. Shame, and something else he had not felt in decades, fear. Not of the storm, but of himself. Fear that his indifference had made him blind, deaf, hollow. The girl staggered again, this time sinking fully to her knees. The bundle in her arms whimpered, yes, whimpered. Damien's eyes widened. It wasn't an object. It wasn't food. It was a baby. His heart lurched. The little girl bent over, whispering fiercely despite her chattering teeth. Don't cry, little one. Don't cry. I'll keep you warm. I'll keep you safe. I promise. Tears stung Damien's eyes, though he couldn't remember the last time he had cried. The sight clawed at him, a child shielding another child, soaked, starving, desperate, and still giving everything she had left. For a moment, time froze. Lightning lit the sky, thunder roared, rain blurred the world into streaks of silver. Inside the Rolls-Royce, Damien Hale sat paralyzed, a man of infinite resources watching a little girl do what he never had, risk everything for someone else. His breath fogged the glass as he leaned closer to the window. She was swaying now, her strength fading. Still, her arms never faltered. Still, she whispered words of comfort to the baby in her arms. Damien's chest tightened until it hurt. He could not move. He could not think. He could only feel the crushing weight of guilt, shame, and confusion as he stared at the fragile figure illuminated by his headlights. The storm raged on. And for the first time in his life, Damien Hale, the billionaire who had conquered markets, built empires, and bought his way out of every problem, felt utterly powerless. Damien's fingers hovered over the steering wheel, stiff, frozen, as the rain continued hammering his car. Every instinct in him screamed to turn the key, shut the world out, and drive up to the mansion where warmth, wine, and silence waited. That was what he always did. For 3 years now, he had seen children at his gates. Sometimes one, sometimes a pair. Thin, hungry, ragged, their eyes begging him for a coin, a crust of bread, a glance of mercy. And for 3 years, Damien Hale had done what billionaires excel at, ignoring what was inconvenient. When guilt did prick at him, he'd roll down his tinted window just enough to toss a coin or a crumpled note. The gesture eased his conscience for the night, though he knew it changed nothing for them. In truth, he preferred not to see their faces. It was easier to look away. But not tonight. Not with this girl. She wasn't begging. She wasn't holding out her hand. She wasn't even asking to be seen. She was fighting the storm itself, protecting a baby with nothing but her fragile body. Damien's throat tightened. He could not look away this time. The girl struggled to her feet, her knees trembling. The bundle in her arms gave a faint cry, and she pressed her lips to it, whispering soothing words. Then, with a desperate glance at the towering gates, she turned and slipped through the shadows toward the back road that curved around the estate. She was leaving. Damien's heart lurched. Something inside him panicked. He lowered the window, rain slashing across his sleeve, and called out, "Wait." But his voice was swallowed by the storm. The girl didn't hear him, or chose not to. She stumbled forward, her small frame swallowed by the darkness. For a moment, Damien sat frozen. He could still drive away. He could still pretend it was none of his concern. The girl would vanish into the night, and with her, the unbearable weight in his chest. But as lightning split the sky, he saw her silhouette again, this time farther away, clutching that bundle tighter than ever, limping down the deserted road. And that was when Damien's shame became unbearable. For 50 years, he had measured life in profits and losses, in acquisitions and deals. He had convinced himself that the occasional donation, the occasional photo opportunity at a charity gala, was enough to prove he was a good man. But now, watching this girl disappear into the dark, he saw the truth laid bare. He had tossed coins while children starved. He had built walls while they froze in alleys. And now, one of those children was about to vanish, taking with her a secret too heavy for her fragile frame. Damien slammed the gear into park, threw open the door, and stepped into the storm. The rain drenched him instantly, soaking his tailored suit, flattening his perfectly styled hair. Cold bit through him, but he didn't care. His polished shoes splashed mud as he stumbled toward the gate, his heart pounding harder than it had in years. The guards had long since retreated to their posts, too far to notice the drama unfolding at the outer road. Damien pressed his hands against the iron bars, peering into the night. The girl was gone. He spun, scanning the road, straining to hear over the roar of the storm. Then, a faint sound. A baby's cry. He followed it. His expensive shoes slipped on the wet pavement as he hurried along the edge of the estate, his breath clouding in the cold. Each step carried a war inside him. A part of him hissed that this was madness, that he was humiliating himself chasing after a street child. Another part whispered that for once in his life, he was doing something human. The crying grew louder. There, a flicker of movement. The girl had ducked into a narrow lane between crumbling brick walls, her small body nearly invisible in the shadows. Damien quickened his pace, his heart thundering. She paused, glancing back as though sensing she was being followed. For an instant, their eyes met, his wide with shock, hers with a depth of weariness that belonged to someone far older than 9. She clutched the bundle tighter and darted into the alley. Damien hesitated only a second before plunging after her. The stench of sewage hit him, mixed with mold and rot. Debris littered the ground, soaking in puddles that swallowed his shoes. His lungs burned as he stumbled deeper, guided by the faint cries of the baby and the shuffle of the girl's bare feet. His heart raced, not from exertion, but from something he could not name. Horror. Shame. Maybe even fear of what he might discover. Every step forward pulled him further from the world he knew, the polished floors, the glittering chandeliers, the silence of wealth. And deeper into a truth he had never dared to face. At last, he saw it, a faint glow ahead, seeping through a jagged hole in a condemned building. The girl had slipped inside. Damien stopped, soaked and shivering. His hands trembled, not only from cold but from the growing awareness that whatever lay beyond that wall would change everything. For the first time in his life, Damien Hale, the man who thought he already knew the weight of power, felt utterly unprepared. He drew in a sharp breath, then stepped toward the light. The glow leaking through the jagged wall wasn't much, just the faint flicker of a scavenged lantern, but in the suffocating blackness of the alley, it was a beacon. Damien pressed closer, his designer suit clinging to his skin, his polished shoes caked with mud and sewage. He hesitated, his breath loud in his ears. The rational side of him screamed to turn back. This wasn't his world. He didn't belong here. But the sound of a baby's whimper silenced every excuse. He bent low and pushed through the opening. What he saw on the other side made his chest tighten until he could hardly breathe. The condemned building's interior was a skeleton of broken beams and crumbling walls. Rainwater dripped steadily from holes in the roof, pooling on the cracked concrete floor. But in the center of the wreckage, someone had carved out a fragile oasis. The little girl. She had built a shelter from cardboard boxes and plastic tarps, pieced together like a fragile nest against the cold. Inside, the lantern's weak light revealed 2 smaller figures. Infants. They were wrapped in rags, their tiny chests rising and falling with shallow breaths. The girl knelt beside them, her wet dress clinging to her bony frame. She pulled a cracked plastic bottle from beside her, carefully tipping it against the lips of one baby. A few drops of cloudy water spilled out, and she steadied her trembling hand with all the patience of a mother. Her own lips were cracked, her skin pale with exhaustion. Yet she never raised the bottle to herself. Every drop went to the babies. "Shoo, my angels," she whispered, her voice hoarse from the storm. "Daddy's here. Daddy won't let you go hungry." The word struck Damien again like a blade, Daddy. An orphan child, herself starving, taking on the role of a father to two infants. His throat tightened as he watched her tear a strip from her already tattered dress and wrap it around one of the babies, shielding its fragile skin from the damp chill. Damien's chest ached. He wanted to speak, to announce himself, but his voice stuck. He simply stood in the shadows, staring at this child who displayed more courage, more sacrifice, than any of the executives who sat around his boardroom table. And then he saw it. As she bent to lift the second baby, her sleeve slipped back, exposing the inside of her thin arm. Damien's breath hitched. There, burned deep into her skin, was a scar. A mark shaped like a stylized crown. His crown. The symbol of Hale Global Enterprises. His company's logo. The world tilted beneath him. He staggered back, his hand flying to his mouth. He knew that mark. It wasn't just printed on contracts, skyscrapers, and product packaging, it was seared into this girl's flesh. Damien's mind reeled. How could it be? Who would brand a child with his company's symbol? He stared harder, horror coursing through him. It wasn't coincidence. This was deliberate. The girl adjusted the infants, then paused. Slowly, as though sensing his gaze, she turned toward the jagged hole. Their eyes met through the flicker of the lantern. There was no fear in her eyes. No surprise. Only a heavy sadness, ancient and weary, that did not belong to a child. "Did you come to take me back?" she asked softly, her small body curling protectively around the babies. Damien's mouth went dry. "Take you back," he stammered. The girl's chin lifted, her eyes narrowing slightly. "They said one day someone would. That I belonged to them. To the crown." She raised her scarred arm, the burn glowing in the lantern light. "I was theirs. Property. That's what they told me." Damien felt the ground sway beneath him. He gripped the wall to steady himself. Property? Children marked as property of his empire? "No," he whispered, his voice breaking. I don't want to take you back." For a long moment, the girl studied him, as if weighing his soul through his eyes. Then she shook her head, almost as if she didn't believe him. She shifted the infants in her arms. "Their names are Hope and Grace," she said, her voice breaking into a tenderness that tore at Damien's chest. "I found them in a dumpster. Somebody threw them away. Like trash. But they're mine now. I'll protect them." Damien swallowed hard, his throat tight. 2 weeks ago, perhaps. That would explain their frailty. He glanced at the babies, skin grayish, breaths shallow, tiny fists clenching the air. How had they survived even this long? And then the truth cut through him like ice. They had survived because of her. For 2 weeks, this little girl had been mother, father, protector, guardian, sacrificing her body to keep them alive. While he, sitting in his glass palace just a few blocks away, had thrown coins out his window and called it generosity. The weight of shame pressed harder against him. He thought of the crown logo again, branded into her flesh. What hand had burned it there? Whose decision had made this innocent child into property? One face flashed in his mind. A name he had avoided for years. Victor Stone. His partner. His oldest friend. Victor had always been ruthless, handling the dirty work, while Damien played the respectable public figure. For years, Damien had ignored whispers about Victor's methods. He told himself they were just rumors. That Victor was ambitious, yes, but not cruel. But now, looking at the scar seared into the girl's arm, Damien knew the truth he had been running from. Victor hadn't just been ruthless. He had been monstrous. Damien's hands trembled. He wanted to deny it, to believe there was some other explanation. But the evidence was branded into a child's skin. The girl's voice pulled him from his spiraling thoughts. "You don't have to pretend," she said quietly. "I know who you are. I've seen you drive past. 3 years, every morning. You never looked at me. Sometimes you threw coins. I always caught them. Because every coin meant milk, or bread. But never enough." Her words struck him like blows. Each syllable stripping away his illusions of decency. "Why now?" she whispered, her eyes glistening but unbroken. "Why did you follow me tonight? Because you saw the babies? Because suddenly I was worth saving?" Damien's chest collapsed under the weight of her truth. He had no answer. The babies whimpered again, their weak cries echoing in the hollow space. The girl rocked them gently, humming a lullaby that cracked in her dry throat. In that dim shelter, surrounded by rot and rain, Damien Hale realized the empire he had spent his life building was not just stained with corruption, it was built upon it. And the scar on the little girl's arm was proof he could no longer ignore. For a long moment, Damien could only stare at the scar seared into the girl's thin arm. The crown, his crown, mocked him from her skin, glowing like a brand of guilt in the flickering light. He forced himself to find words, though his throat felt raw. "Who did that to you?" The girl's eyes didn't flinch. "A man named Victor." Damien's stomach dropped. The name hit like a hammer, though part of him had already known the answer. Victor Stone. His business partner for 2 decades. The man who had helped him transform Hale Global from a respectable company into a sprawling empire worth billions. The man who had always been willing to do whatever it takes, while Damien looked the other way. Damien's lips parted, but no words came. The girl stroked the forehead of one baby as she continued, her voice as steady as if she were reciting history she had told herself 1,000 times. "My mother worked in your factories," she said. Her name was Naomi. The name struck a faint chord in Damien's memory, an employee he had seen only once or twice, a quiet woman with intelligent eyes. "She was an accountant," the girl went on. "She discovered something, papers, numbers that didn't add up. Money that should have gone to wages, but disappeared into places she couldn't trace. She told me she was scared." Damien's chest tightened. He remembered a quarterly report years ago when discrepancies had been raised. Victor had smoothed it over, assuring him it was nothing, that the woman making noise had been reassigned. The girl's small fingers tightened around the bundle. "One night, my mother didn't come home. I waited. I waited all night. In the morning, Victor came instead." Damien's heart pounded. The girl lifted her arm again, exposing the scar. "He burned this into me. He said I belonged to the crown now. That one day, when I was useful, he'd come for me." Her voice didn't crack. "If anything, it grew stronger. Then he left me at an orphanage. I thought I'd be safe. But the men there worked for him. They beat the children. They sold some of them." Damien felt bile rise in his throat. "I escaped," the girl whispered. "I ran. I lived on the streets for 2 years. And then I found them." She looked down at the 2 babies, now asleep in her arms. Hope and Grace. They were in a dumpster behind a restaurant. Still alive. Still crying. Someone had thrown them away. Her eyes lifted, locking on his. They were far too old for her age, filled with grief and a hardness no child should carry. "I couldn't leave them," she said. "So I became their father. Their mother. Their everything. Because no one else would." The silence that followed was suffocating. Rain dripped through the roof, splashing into puddles. The babies stirred faintly, sighing in their fragile sleep. Damien couldn't breathe. His empire, his so-called triumph, was a graveyard of secrets. And Victor, his partner, had been the gravedigger. He thought back to every moment he had chosen ignorance. Every time he had waved away rumors about Victor. Every document he had signed without reading too closely. Every child at his gate he had ignored. And now here she was, living proof of his guilt. "I didn't know," he whispered, though the words sounded hollow even to his own ears. The girl's stare didn't waver. "You didn't want to know." The truth cut sharper than any blade. Damien felt his knees weaken, and he lowered himself against the damp wall, his soaked suit heavy with shame. He had built his fortune on lies. He had built it on Victor's ruthlessness, on Naomi's silence, on children like this one, discarded, marked, forgotten. And yet here she sat, not broken, but defiant. Protecting life when all the world had taken from her. For the first time in decades, Damien Hale felt the crushing weight of responsibility. Not as a CEO. Not as a billionaire. But as a man. He looked at the girl again, at the way she wrapped herself around the babies, her every breath dedicated to keeping them alive. "You shouldn't have to carry this," he said hoarsely. Her expression softened, just slightly. "Someone has to." Damien closed his eyes. He could still hear Victor's voice in his memory, smooth and confident. "Let me handle the dirty work, Damien. You just smile for the cameras." And he had. For years. But no smile could erase the brand burned into a child's skin. Damien opened his eyes, determination flickering through the haze of shame. "You're not alone anymore," he said quietly. "Not while I still breathe." The girl tilted her head, uncertain whether to believe him. But inside Damien, something had shifted. This wasn't about charity. This wasn't about tossing coins to ease his conscience. This was about justice. About redemption. And it would start here, with her. The lantern's light trembled against the damp walls as Damien sat in silence, the weight of the girl's words pressing on him like a mountain. He wanted to ask more, to demand details about Victor's crimes, but the faint rustle outside the building stopped him cold. The girl froze too. Her head tilted, eyes narrowing. She shifted the infants in her arms, pressing them close against her chest as her small body tensed like a cornered animal. "You hear that?" she whispered. Damien strained his ears. At first, only the rain. Then, a crunch. Footsteps on gravel. Several of them. His heart lurched. The girl's lips pressed into a tight line. "They always find me," she murmured. Before Damien could respond, the lantern flickered, throwing their shadows against the wall. For a fleeting second, he imagined Victor's men standing outside, guns glinting, waiting. "We can't stay here," Damien said urgently. He reached out a hand. "Come with me." The girl hesitated, her eyes searching his face. For years, she had survived by trusting no one. But the sound of voices outside sealed the decision. With a small nod, she stood, cradling the infants tighter, and let Damien guide her toward the opening. They slipped into the storm again, Damien shielding her with his body as best he could. His luxury car loomed at the edge of the road, absurdly out of place in the filth. He threw open the door. "In," he urged. The girl climbed into the back seat, curling protectively around the babies. Damien slid behind the wheel and slammed the door shut just as two figures rounded the corner of the alley. For a heartbeat, their flashlights sliced through the rain, illuminating the jagged hole in the wall they had just escaped from. Damien's gut twisted. He started the engine. The Rolls-Royce roared to life, and with a surge of adrenaline, he pulled away, tires spitting gravel. In the rearview mirror, he caught a glimpse of the men. One of them lifted a phone to his ear, speaking into it with urgency. Damien's pulse quickened. There was no doubt who he was calling. Victor knew. The mansion gates swung open as the car approached, the guards recognizing Damien's headlights. He sped up the driveway, his heart pounding, until the familiar facade of his sprawling home came into view. Normally, the sight of its marble pillars and vast windows filled him with pride. Tonight, it looked like a hollow fortress, cold, empty, meaningless. He parked sharply under the portico and rushed to the back door, holding an umbrella though it did little to shield them from the storm. The girl emerged, clutching the infant so tightly her knuckles blanched white. Damien led them inside. The warmth of the mansion washed over them, but instead of comfort, it only highlighted the cruel contrast. Chandeliers glittered above them, their light spilling across polished floors and priceless art. The girl paused in the entryway, her bare feet leaving muddy prints on the marble. Her wide eyes swept across the cavernous space. "I've never seen so much empty space," she whispered. Damien's chest tightened. He had built all this, room after room of wealth, gilded halls meant to impress, walls lined with art worth more than most people earned in a lifetime. Yet for all its splendor, it had never felt alive. Tonight, as a barefoot child carrying two infants stood in his foyer, the truth stabbed him, everything he had built was hollow. "Come," Damien said softly. He led them to the kitchen, the only part of the house that ever held a trace of warmth. He pulled blankets from a cabinet and wrapped them around the children. The girl sank into a chair, rocking the babies, her small body trembling. She still hadn't eaten, Damien realized, yet every ounce of her attention went to the infants. He opened the fridge, pulling out bread, cheese, fruit, items that had always been stocked by staff but rarely touched. He placed them in front of her. Her eyes flicked to him, uncertain. "Eat," Damien urged. She hesitated, then took a piece of bread. But before biting into it, she tore it into small pieces and fed the infants first. Only when they had swallowed did she finally take a bite herself. Damien watched, his shame burning hotter. This was parenthood. Not the kind defined by bloodlines or wealth, but by sacrifice. While she fed the children, Damien slipped away into his study. He shut the door behind him and approached his desk, his heart hammering. For years, he had avoided looking too closely at certain files. Victor always insisted on handling them. "Let me deal with the details," he would say. Damien had been content to sign off, to remain ignorant. Now, he couldn't afford ignorance. He opened his laptop and typed into the secure server Victor had always managed. Passwords, codes, Damien knew just enough to gain access. What he found made his blood run cold. Dozens of offshore transfers. Shell companies. Payments labeled security services that were clearly bribes. And then, he stopped, his eyes locking on a file labeled special resources. His hands shook as he opened it. A list of names appeared. Some crossed out. Others labeled with cryptic notes. Naomi. Resolved permanently. His stomach churned. Beneath her name, others followed. Entire families. And beside some, young element transferred to program. Damien's eyes blurred. He scrolled faster. Dozens of names. Dozens of children. All marked, categorized, moved like inventory. And then, photos. Children no older than 5 or 6, each bearing the crown mark. Their eyes empty, their expressions blank. Some looked drugged. Others beaten. Damien slammed the laptop shut, bile rising in his throat. He staggered back, gripping the edge of the desk to steady himself. Victor hadn't just exploited the company. He had turned Hale Global into a machine that consumed innocence itself. Damien pressed his fists to his temples, his mind spinning. How many times had he chosen not to see? How many signatures had he placed on papers that enabled this? A sound outside the window jolted him. He froze. Through the glass, faint silhouettes moved among the trees. Flashlights flickered. Voices carried low on the wind. They had come. Damien's heart raced. He rushed back to the kitchen, his shoes silent against the polished floors. The girl looked up, instantly alert. "They're here," she whispered before he could speak. Her instincts were sharp, honed by years of survival. She hugged the babies tighter. Damien's blood ran cold. Victor wasn't wasting time. He had sent his men straight to the mansion. For the first time in his life, Damien realized his fortress wasn't protection, it was a trap. The walls that had kept the world out now boxed him in with danger closing from all sides. He crouched beside the girl, forcing his voice calm. "We have to move. There's a safe exit through the pantry. Follow me." She nodded, though her wide eyes betrayed her fear. As Damien guided her through the hidden passage, his mind spun. He had thought himself powerful, untouchable. But Victor knew every corner of his life, every secret of his empire. There was nowhere he could run that Victor wouldn't find. And yet, he looked at the girl, her fragile arms wrapped fiercely around two helpless infants, and felt resolve ignite inside him. For once, he wouldn't run. For once, he would fight. The hidden passage spilled Damien, the girl, and the two fragile infants into the back garden, the storm slashing down harder than before. The air felt thick, electric, charged with menace. Lanterns bobbed beyond the hedges. Victor's men had already surrounded the property. "There's no way out," the girl whispered, her voice steady despite the fear etched across her small face. "He's here." Damien clenched his jaw. His heart pounded, his mind racing. He had spent decades running from responsibility, but he couldn't run tonight. Not with 3 innocent lives in his care. He guided her back inside through a secondary door, one that opened into the mansion's grand hall. The chandeliers swayed slightly from the vibrations of thunder. The silence inside was deafening, broken only by the storm outside and the faint whimpers of hope and grace. Then a voice cut through the air, smooth, mocking, chillingly familiar. "Damien." The name echoed across the marble, rolling like thunder. From the far side of the hall, Victor Stone emerged. He wore a tailored coat, his hair slicked back, his smile sharp and cold. Behind him, 2 armed men flanked the doorway, their eyes scanning the room. Damien instinctively stepped in front of the girl, shielding her and the babies. His pulse hammered in his ears. Victor spread his arms as if greeting an old friend. "There you are. I was starting to think you'd grown a conscience and hidden from me." His eyes shifted, narrowing on the girl. The smile widened, predatory. "And there she is. My lost property." The girl stiffened, clutching the infants tighter. "I'm not yours," she spat, her small voice fierce. Victor chuckled. "Still fiery, I see. That's why I marked you. I knew you'd be useful one day." His eyes glittered with something darker than greed. "And now, you've brought me not 1, but 3 assets. 2 babies, fresh and unspoiled. Do you know what buyers will pay for healthy newborns?" Damien's stomach lurched. "You're sick," he growled. Victor turned his gaze on him, calm, almost amused. "No, Damien. I'm practical. The world discards children like trash. I simply recycle them. I turn waste into wealth. It's business." Damien's fists clenched. For years, he had ignored Victor's ruthlessness, convincing himself it was just efficient strategy. But now the mask was gone. "They're not resources," Damien said, his voice shaking with fury. "They're children." Victor tilted his head, pitying. "That's where you've always been weak. You see faces where I see numbers. You see innocence where I see opportunity. That's why I ran the empire, while you smiled for the cameras." The words cut, because they were true. Damien had let Victor run everything, hiding behind respectability while his partner built an empire of cruelty. But not tonight. You'll never touch them, Damien said, his voice low but steady. Victor smirked. Oh, Damien. You've always been sentimental. But you forget, everything you own, everything you've built, belongs to me. Legally, every dirty deal has your signature. If I go down, you go down. You're as guilty as I am. Damien's chest tightened. He had signed those papers, looked away from those reports. Victor had trapped him in complicity. But before despair could take root, a small voice broke through. You're wrong, the girl said, stepping forward despite Damien's attempt to hold her back. Her scarred arm trembled, but her eyes blazed. Victor's smile faltered. What did you say? You think I'm just a mark on a list, she said, her voice quivering with both fear and strength. But I'm more than that. And I'm not afraid of you anymore. Victor's face darkened. Careful, little one. You wouldn't want me to hurt the babies. The girl lifted her chin defiantly. You can't. Because if anything happens to me, everything you've done will be exposed. Damien blinked, stunned. What? She didn't look at him, her eyes locked on Victor. Before I escaped the orphanage, I copied your files. Names. Accounts. Photos. Everything. They're hidden. And if I don't enter a code every 3 days, they'll be sent to the police. To the press. To everyone. Victor's smile vanished completely, replaced by a flicker of rage. You're lying, he hissed. The girl didn't flinch. Try me. For the first time, Damien saw Victor unsettled. His old partner, the man who had seemed untouchable, suddenly looked vulnerable. A gun scraped as one of Victor's men shifted. Damien's heart leapt. He instinctively placed himself in front of the girl again, his body trembling with adrenaline. Victor's voice dropped, cold as steel. Give me the children, Damien. The girl, the babies. Hand them over, and maybe I let you keep what little reputation you have left. Refuse, he nodded toward his men. One raised his weapon. And you all disappear tonight. A tragic accident. Thieves breaking into the mansion. Headlines write themselves. Damien's breath came hard and fast. His empire. His life. His freedom. All at stake. But then he looked down at the girl, this child who had sacrificed everything for 2 infants she had found in the trash. She stood trembling, yet unbroken. Braver at 9 than he had been in 50 years. And Damien Hale made his choice. You'll have to kill me first, he said. His voice was calm. Unshakable. The hall went silent. Victor's eyes narrowed. The storm thundered outside, rattling the windows as if the world itself held its breath. Damien straightened his shoulders. For once, he wasn't thinking about profits, deals, or consequences. For once, he was thinking about what was right. Behind him, the girl's grip tightened around the babies, her eyes shining with both fear and something stronger, trust. And in that moment, Damien knew, this wasn't just about redemption anymore. This was war. Victor's smirk returned, but thinner now, stretched across his face like a mask cracking under pressure. He motioned with his hand, and one of his men raised the gun higher, the barrel glinting in the chandelier's light. Damien's pulse thundered. The muzzle looked enormous, a black void ready to swallow them all. He forced himself to stand tall, though every nerve screamed with fear. You've lost your mind, Damien, Victor said smoothly. You think one act of defiance erases decades of silence? You've been my partner. Every crime I committed has your signature attached. If I go down, you go down. Don't fool yourself into thinking you're some hero. Damien didn't flinch. Then I'll go down. But I won't let you destroy them. He gestured toward the girl and the infants. His voice shook, but his resolve did not. Not another child. Not ever again. Victor's expression hardened, the pretense of civility gone. Do you know what I've built? He spat. An empire that spans continents. An organization that turns weakness into profit. These children were nothing before me, hungry, homeless, forgotten. I gave them purpose. Damien's voice rose, fury breaking through years of cowardice. You branded them like cattle. You stole their lives. You killed Naomi and who knows how many others, all to build your kingdom of blood. The words echoed off the marble walls, bouncing back like thunder. Victor's lips curled. Strong words, Damien. But words won't save you. He raised a hand, signaling his man to fire. And then, a faint click. Victor froze. Slowly, his eyes shifted toward the sound. At the edge of the hall, hidden behind a column, the girl held Damien's phone. The screen glowed faintly, its camera pointed directly at Victor. Her small voice trembled but carried like a bell. It's already recording. Victor's eyes widened, fury flooding his face. What have you done? The girl stood straighter, though her knees shook. You confessed. Everyone heard you. And the files I copied, they'll go to the police if anything happens to me. Damien's chest swelled with a fierce, protective pride. This child, barefoot, scarred, orphaned, had just cornered a man who ruled with fear. Victor's mask shattered. He lunged forward, yanking the pistol from his guard's hands. His face twisted with rage. You think you've beaten me? You're nothing. I'll shoot, Damien interrupted, stepping squarely between Victor and the children. His voice was calm, almost serene. But know this, whether I die here or not, it's over. The evidence is already in the right hands. Your empire is finished. Victor's arm trembled. The barrel shook as thunder roared outside. You won't do it, Damien continued, his voice steady. Because for the first time in your life, you've lost control. As if on cue, faint sirens pierced the storm. Growing louder. Closer. Victor's eyes darted toward the windows, panic flashing in his gaze. Damien took a step closer. They're coming for you, Victor. Not for me. Not for her. For you. It's over. The little girl's eyes never left Victor's face. She clutched the babies tighter, whispering soothing words as though her courage could shield them from the gun pointed their way. Victor snarled, raising the pistol higher, his finger tightening on the trigger. And the mansion doors burst open. Armed officers stormed inside, their shouts cutting through the thunder. Drop the weapon. Now. Victor spun, rage and desperation colliding. But before he could aim, 3 red dots landed on his chest. Don't. Damien shouted, his arms raised. For a heartbeat, the hall froze in time. Victor's face twisted between fury and terror, his knuckles white around the pistol. Then, with a guttural cry, he dropped it. The weapon clattered across the marble, skidding to Damien's feet. The officers swarmed, pinning Victor to the ground. His curses filled the hall as handcuffs snapped shut around his wrists. Damien exhaled, his whole body trembling with release. The girl lowered the phone slowly, her small hands shaking. For the first time since Damien had met her, tears filled her eyes, not from fear, but from relief. He knelt beside her. It's over, he whispered. You're safe now. Her gaze met his, searching his face as if testing the truth. Then she nodded, hugging the babies so tightly it seemed she would never let them go. Victor was dragged away, his screams echoing down the marble corridor until the sound was swallowed by the storm. Damien turned to the girl. In that moment, he knew, his life would never be the same. He had stood in the line of fire, not for profit, not for pride, but for her. For hope. For grace. And for the first time in his life, Damien Hale felt free. The storm had quieted by the time the last police car pulled away from the mansion. The flashing red and blue lights faded into the distance, leaving the estate in an unfamiliar silence. Damien stood at the threshold of his grand hall, the weight of the night pressing on him. His suit was torn, his hair disheveled, his body exhausted. Yet beneath the fatigue was something new, something he had not felt in decades. Clarity. Behind him, the girl sat curled on the velvet sofa, Hope and Grace resting peacefully in her arms. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting a warm glow across her small, scarred face. She was humming again, the same broken lullaby he'd heard in the shack, only now it sounded softer, safer. Damien lingered in the doorway, watching her. He had expected the house to feel empty after the police left. Instead, it felt alive for the first time. The next days blurred into a whirlwind of investigations. Federal agents combed through Victor's files, many of which the girl had already secured on a hidden drive. Names. Bank accounts. Locations. With her evidence, authorities uncovered warehouses, shell companies, and, most importantly, dozens of children trapped in Victor's programs. 43 were rescued in the first week alone. Each revelation was another dagger in Damien's conscience. His empire, Hale Global, wasn't just tainted. It was rotten to the core. Government auditors froze the accounts, seized properties, and tore apart the company's glossy image. For the first time in 50 years, Damien Hale was no longer a billionaire. But to his surprise, he didn't feel loss. When his lawyers asked if he wanted to fight to salvage his fortune, Damien shook his head. "Let it go," he said simply. "Every dollar that came from him is poisoned." What remained, the mansion, a few clean investments, enough to live modestly, was more than he deserved. Yet as he walked through the marble halls littered with toys, baby bottles, and scraps of crayon drawings taped to the walls, Damien felt richer than ever. One afternoon, he stepped into his garden and froze. The girl was kneeling in the grass, her dress patched with mismatched fabric. Hope crawled clumsily nearby, tugging at blades of grass, while Grace babbled happily in her lap. The girl laughed, a sound so pure, so unguarded, that Damien felt his throat tighten. It had been decades since this garden heard laughter. Decades since the air carried anything but silence. "Daddy Damien," the girl called, her smile beaming when she saw him. The name hit him like a sunrise. Not Mr. Hale. Not Sir. Daddy. He blinked rapidly, fighting the sting in his eyes. Slowly, he walked over and lowered himself onto the grass. The suit he wore meant nothing here. The empire he had lost meant even less. But the 3 lives in front of him, they meant everything. As the weeks turned to months, the transformation deepened. The mansion was no longer sterile. The dining table, once used for formal dinners with investors, was now crowded with coloring books and half-finished bottles. Priceless art on the walls was outshone by crooked paper drawings of stick figures holding hands. At night, Damien often sat awake, staring at the scar on the girl's arm. He had brought in the best surgeons, offering to erase it completely. But she shook her head. "It's part of my story," she said quietly. "I don't want to forget where I came from. Because forgetting means it could happen again." Damien admired her resilience. He realized she wasn't just surviving, she was leading. Already, she spoke of growing up to fight for children like herself, to make sure no one else was branded or abandoned. For the first time in his life, Damien had someone to learn from. The girl had taught him that true wealth wasn't in bank accounts, stock markets, or sprawling estates. It was in sacrifice. In family. In love. And now, every time he walked through the mansion's halls, he didn't see emptiness. He saw life. He saw hope. Most of all, he saw the family he never knew he was searching for. 6 months later, the summer sun poured golden light across the Hale estate, draping the garden in warmth. Laughter echoed across the manicured lawns, bright, innocent, unrestrained. Damien stood on the terrace, his hands in his pockets, watching the scene below. Daniel, no, not Daniel. Naomi's daughter. He had to remind himself that she was still only 9, though her eyes carried the weight of lifetimes. She chased Hope across the grass, her bare feet kicking up sprays of dew. Grace clapped from her blanket, squealing at every stumble and recovery. For decades, this garden had been silent. The sound of children's laughter transformed it into something sacred. Damien closed his eyes, inhaling deeply. The scent of roses carried on the breeze. For the first time in half a century, he felt peace. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He frowned, pulling it out. It was Sarah, the social worker assigned to their case. He answered quickly. Mr. Hale, her voice was warm, almost trembling with excitement. I wanted to call you personally. The court has finalized everything. As of this morning, the adoption is official. You are now, legally and permanently, the father of Naomi's daughter, Hope, and Grace. Damien's throat tightened. He turned away, blinking hard, staring out at the horizon as tears burned his eyes. Thank you, he managed, his voice breaking. Thank you. When he lowered the phone, the girl was standing at the edge of the terrace, her deep eyes fixed on him. She had heard. Somehow, she always knew. Daddy, she said softly, patting toward him. The word still felt unreal. A title he had never earned, never thought he wanted. Yet hearing it from her lips felt like the greatest honor of his life. Why are you crying? She asked, her small hand slipping into his. He knelt down, pulling her into an embrace, careful not to disturb the sleeping Grace in her arms. Because, he whispered, his voice trembling, we're a real family now. She leaned back, studying him with a smile that carried all the wisdom of her young, scarred soul. We always were, Daddy. From the first night. Damien's heart broke and healed all at once. He pulled her close again, burying his face in her damp curls, inhaling the faint scent of soap and sunshine. The moment was interrupted by Hope tugging at his trouser leg. The toddler looked up with mischief in her eyes, a fistful of grass clutched proudly. Not again, the girl laughed, bending down to pry the greenery from her sister's tiny hands. Hope, grass isn't food. Damien chuckled, lifting Grace into his arms and settling onto the grass. For once, he didn't care about his tailored suit or the dirt smudging his shoes. All that mattered was the small circle of life around him. He watched the girl fuss over her siblings, her movements instinctive, tender. She was only 9, yet she carried herself with the heart of a parent. Damien realized she wasn't just surviving anymore. She was thriving. Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Damien lit a fire in the study. The children sprawled across the rug, coloring in books Sarah had brought. Crayon lines crossed the pages in messy rainbows, bold and imperfect. He studied them as if they were priceless works of art. The girl looked up suddenly. Do you regret it? Damien frowned. Regret what? Losing all your money. The company. Everything. Her voice was quiet, but there was a challenge in her eyes, as though she feared one day he might resent her for the cost of his transformation. Damien set his glass of water down, leaning forward. Never, he said firmly. Her eyes searched his face. I spent 50 years collecting things that meant nothing, he continued. All the cars, the houses, the power, it was empty. But you 3, his voice cracked. He gestured toward the babies, then back to her. You gave me a reason to live. You gave me a family. That's worth more than all the money in the world. Her lips curved into a smile, soft, knowing, far too wise for her years. She lowered her gaze back to the coloring book, humming under her breath. Damien sat back, his chest warm. He realized she hadn't asked out of doubt, but to remind him of the promise he'd made, to never return to the man he once was. That night, as the children slept upstairs, Damien wandered through the mansion's halls. For the first time, they didn't echo with emptiness. Toys were scattered, drawings taped to walls, tiny socks left carelessly on stair steps. Life had returned to a house once suffocated by wealth. He paused at the grand window overlooking the garden. The storm from months ago felt like another lifetime. Tonight, the moonlight bathed the grass in silver. True wealth, he thought, isn't counted in numbers. It's counted in moments like these. He turned, listening to the faint sound of Grace stirring upstairs. The girl's soft lullaby followed, wrapping the night in comfort. Damien smiled, his heart full. He had spent 50 years building an empire. But it was here, surrounded by 3 children who had been discarded by the world, that he discovered his greatest fortune. As the fire crackled low and the children's soft breathing filled the mansion, Damien Hale realized his life had begun not the day he made his first million, but the night he followed a little girl through the storm. That night had stripped away everything false and left only what mattered. He had lost an empire, but gained a family. He had surrendered fortune, but discovered love. And in the arms of a child who once called herself Daddy, Damien finally understood the truth. Real wealth isn't in what you own. It's in who you choose to protect. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that love is stronger than power, that sacrifice is richer than gold, then stay with us. Because there are more stories like this, stories of broken hearts that learn to heal, of lost souls that find family, of the smallest voices teaching the wealthiest among us what truly matters. Backhand index pointing right. Subscribe now. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Because sometimes, one act of love can change everything.